Probably one thing I'd seen here, and it was before we actually did the water table, but it always used to come off the track and flow down and through here, and there was, where that bit of gravel was, there was just an open area, and the tile come down this gully, which was only tiles for a little bit, and was drain flow, that's why it's now worked right through the gully. It wasn't last year in Swedes, but we had to dig the gully up, so we might as well level it out, and it'd be good thing of putting some grass seed on there shortly, as we won't have any issues in the winter. But that used to be open just in that area there, just from the fence through, so the tiles come out above, and then the water would come down here off the track, go in there, unless you got a great big flood. If we got a great big flood, it would go straight across the top of the track, and some of it from the gully would too, and down across the paddock. But we were putting this stuff off here straight through there, coming out of tile just at that bank, just where it drops over that bank there, and really it was pretty steep down into the creek, so all the runoff from the track was going virtually straight into there. So I had to yarn to David about what we could do about that. We've got the same issue on some other tracks, but generally they're nowhere near a creek, and they've got plenty of time to filter out before we get there. So this was one of the ones that we'd identified as being an issue. So originally we tried to look at putting the silt trap in here, but actually it was a digger's idea to say, well, it'd be a lot better on the other side, which made sense, and just hoik it through the fence. So that was a good plan for that. So that probably covers off. We get a bit of rain down here, so what Keith said when he was here was go a bit wider with our fence around it, because we'll get a bit of long grass there to catch any flow that comes down through here, and catch a bit more of the overland flow when we get a big rain, because there's sort of 4-inch drain flow up these gullies here above us. The paddock above the gully we actually haven't cultivated, will come down each side of it. It's a little bit hard to quite see into it from here because it meanders up through there, but there's probably a 3-4 metre strip up the gully that's not cultivated there.
So that's your buffering.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll get some gravel back on this track, but hopefully it'll grow grass again eventually. But we had no real good water table on it. It was only one that used to keep blocking up and flowing out onto the track because there was no real shape in it. So we shifted that out into the paddock and spread it out, and then done this. But the consequence of cleaning out a wood table is that you get the clay going down the creek. And when the forestry went in behind us here, there's about 5,000 acres of forestry in behind us, and a fair chunk of that, over half of it, would come this way down through this creek in the catchment. And probably 3-4 years after they put the roads in there, the creek would go yellow every time we got a significant rain. So there's a lot of silt comes off those tracks, if you know what I mean. I think our winter cropping's a big issue, but me personally, I think our roading, not only farm tracks, but public roads, are the next biggest issue that we probably have, to be honest, as far as silt goes.
Keith, you've got something to add to that?
As everyone had a look, like you can actually see where some of the sediment's being captured. That's a good indication of how it's working. And in terms of choosing a spot, there's certain areas you can choose on farm where you get your biggest bang for your buck. And here it was a concentrated effect, so it's quite a small catchment. It's 1/4 of a hectare. David might work out about 2,500 square metres. And so, but based off those guides, 40 square metres per hectare. Yep. So 1/4 of a hectare, this needs to be at least 10 square metres, and it's 20, so he's doubled the minimum size in this case. Oh yeah. So that'll mean it'll capture the coarse sediment, and it'll also capture some of the finer stuff, which we can see if you have a close look. And you can see how it's been channeled in, and it's longer than it is wide. So this is a pretty good example of your more theory-based sediment trap. How deep did you go, Russell? It was about a metre and a bit?
Yeah, so I'd be lucky to be a metre below there now.
Yep.
Probably 3/4 of a metre, I'd say, down below there, probably where it is. About just over a metre, I'd say, yeah.
Yeah, and so you don't want to go too deep when it's quite narrow, because you still want to be able to slope those sides so that you don't get so much caving in. And then your outlet, is that 6-inch Nova flows?
Yeah, 6-inch, and it goes into 6-inch that comes down the gully here. Well, it's 4-inch just up here, but we did a shortcut of 6-inch to take this in with it to join it in.
Yeah, and did Dave Moat tell you to use that size, or you figured it? Yeah. Yeah, so that's perfect, and it'll only take the water once it's filled up a bit. And I did some calculations, but again, how much we want to go into maths, I'm not sure, but I figure it holds 20,000 litres, and if there was no evaporation or infiltration, there'd be about 2.2 million litres come off this area over the course of a year, given 900 mils of rainfall and 1/4 of a hectare catchment. There will be infiltration, there will be evaporation, various other things, but it just gives you an indication. There's quite a lot of water stored there, and then there's quite a lot of water that comes off throughout the year in various intensities.
probably the only other comment would be that Keith might think we've got the fence slightly close, but to talk to the digger driver, and we can't get too much further away and then reach and clean it and drop it that way, which is, you could bring it out this way and drop it onto a truck, but that becomes painful too, if you know what I mean. So that was why the fence is there. Ideally you'd probably be another metre away, but he hasn't got a long boom air guy, so yeah.
Yep. And you can see during the course of the discussions, just to recap what Russell was saying, the contaminant is sediment and a little bit of E. coli probably and a little bit of phosphorus, just because it's always attached. It's overland flow, and this will slow the overland flow and treat it before it gets to the creek. Yeah, so it's visual evidence.
Yeah, and probably the other thing now, if we get a big rain event, at least if we've got some grass out there, it's going across the overflow and got some filtering effect before it gets to the creek.
So, because as Keith and Russell have identified, tracks are one of the key areas of contaminant loss. So that's the risk. And then the second thing that we're actually identified on dairy farms is also gates going onto tracks as well, and particularly if they're around culvert areas. So that's a really good farming practice further on down the track, is perhaps bring it back 10 metres, cut off that area on a triangular, and you'd plant that up in some sort of grass or something like that. But it's just identifying that risk of contaminant loss through that high stock use area, and quite often they might be dug out a bit. They might have a bit of rainwater ponding or something like that, and that gets into the waterway. So it's actually removing that risk of that sediment and contaminant getting into the waterway. So it's things like that if we start thinking of it in a way of how can we can see the risk, what's a cheap, easy way of and it's not going to affect our stock, our stock management as well. I think that's the key to it, because we don't want to put in these things, and then it means that when you drive a mob of ewes up or something like that, and it just doesn't work. That whole movement. So yeah.
I think another key aspect of this is you don't have a lot of options in terms of prevention or management. Like, you can't just maintain vegetation cover to keep that there. You can add a bit of gravel. I think you were saying you might do that.
The track, hopefully they sort of on that track. Yeah.
So in this case, treatment is kind of your only option for this particular case, whereas across the farm, you're putting in your water system, you're doing your fencing, you're using crossings instead of fords. You sometimes have some other things to work through before you go to a sediment trap, but here it really is a good spot for it, and it is doing a really good job.
So improvements on this design, guys?
Fencing is a key one, and then
well done, Russell.
yeah,
Got to get finished yet.
you're on your way.
It was going to be this morning, but the bank's coming this afternoon. I thought I'd better sort a couple of things.
Oh, yeah.
Tell him a good story first.
Apparently he's good on the pies.
I'll see a couple of other bankers here.
And then planting, particularly around the edge, you'll have to be a bit careful to not get in the way of the digger, but carrot sector around the edge, especially as you get bigger, you get a bit of water wave sort of action, and that can erode the edges if you don't protect it. So planting around the edge with carrot sector is a really good idea. And then, yeah, maybe shading, but I don't think you'll have any problems with ducks. Fish, there might be one or two. I'd make one final comment. This is, everyone knows, critical source area. You got the areas coming down. We talked a bit about it over there, but that's the other thing potentially, Russell, is just you were saying before you didn't cultivate it last time.
Yeah, one of the Swedes we didn't, but we ended up, because we'd done a ditch up and it was all rough, so we wanted to level it out, so we did cultivate it.
Yep.
Then,
And in terms of a sediment trap, like another one could be at the base of one of those hills in the future, and it would be similar to the one we saw at the start. But yeah, your management in terms of not cultivating it when that's possible, and keeping stock out and grazing towards it and leaving it last, and then coming from the top of it all the way down is another good option for winter grazing. But it comes past, and yeah, it would be similar to this, but just a bit bigger, and again, it would be a bund with outlet off to one side. Yep.
Right, any further questions?
How do you sort of identify when you need to clean them out, like when the silt's starting to come over the top, or ideally before that?
Yeah, you'd want to
Like the smaller one might be a bit more often than, say, a bigger one. But
it's flexible, and it'll essentially just come to when the digger's coming past. But yeah, you still want a bit of volume in there. It works when there's enough that water comes in and it sits there for a bit. If it's full of sediment and there's only say 20 or 30 centimetres, it's not going to be working very well. The water will just flow straight to the nova flow and carry on. So yeah, you'd probably let it fill up maybe half, and then you'd want to excavate it. But if the digger was coming past, you'd just do it before then.
We were talking in
No hard and fast rule.
about the nutrient value in that sediment. Ideally, if possible, in terms of the phosphorus and potassium in that, you probably spread it back on the paddocks if you were able to do that.
Yeah, you could. Yep. Yeah, if you had a muck spreader, you'd put it back on. We did do some water quality testing, some sediment testing, and it showed the levels of nutrients in the sediment are above what would be considered a natural level if there was no farming or human interaction. But it wasn't spectacularly high or atypical, and there's no real reference for deposited sediment, but the Jacobs or New River Estuary has a lot higher nutrient in its deposited sediment, which is what an ES scientist sent me for reference. So it was at the lower end, but yeah, definitely worth capturing and better than being in the waterway heading down to Jacobs. Yep.
Those results are in your handout as well if you're curious. So we took a sediment sample out of all 3 of the ponds we're looking at today, and we tested them, but some of them are quite new. So yeah, the sediment test is as explained.
This one here was quite low, but you expect that with clay mostly going in here, with the other two are soil. With, I mean, that one we've just been to, and the other you'll see some more down by Calliodes here. Shortly they were soil too, so more than clay. So that's probably why the difference is, I suspect.
Yeah.
In terms of the sediment that you're removing, like realistically, we were talking in the car for sheep farmers, you're just going to pile it up somewhere. Like what? Not many sheep and beef farmers would have a muck spreader or anything. So,
yeah.
Like, what's the best practice in terms of removing that sediment and where to?
Yeah, just somewhere safe where it won't be mobilised again. So you wouldn't want to put it in the middle of the paddock that you're going to winter graze later on, and you might want to fill in hollows. It just depends.
It was easy in this one because we had crop on here, like all the stuff off here was just spread out across the paddock. They could just spread that across, so it's pretty easy once worked up. But sometimes you might have that opportunity, but you could probably make a pile out there, couldn't you, for a while, and as long as it wasn't going to get affected somewhere, and then spread it out next time you're going through the paddock, a tractor or a dozer or something, and you're cultivating it then. It's good. You're full of the goodies, so that should grow well there, the crop around that area.
Yeah, just not next to it, just not in the flood zone essentially, you know.
Keith, sorry, one more for you. Circling back to the plants, when you are planting around sediment traps, and tile drains and things, just talking about the root structures and...
Yeah, you want to just be careful that the roots won't go down and block your tile drain. So I've talked to a few farmers, they'll never ever plant anything ever again. They're against the plants. So yeah, just be careful. Carrot sector doesn't go very deep, and they reckon flax doesn't either, but pittosporums will go a bit deeper if you start planting trees. So yeah, it's a little bit, you got to look into it. But grasses and the smaller, the less height tends to mean less root mass generally. So if you plant lower things, you'll be right, and you have an idea of how deep the tile is. But yeah, don't plant willows. Willows are probably the worst. They'll go far, and poplars apparently they go quite far as well. And yeah, planting is quite hard. I'd recommend a protector generally, and consider it going back and spraying around it at least 3 times over the summer for the following 2 years. And yeah, just keep an eye on it, because it's better to plant less plants and look after them really well. And I have a preference for buying bigger plants. You know, these are probably PB2s, give or take, so they'd be around $5 if you brought them from a nursery. If you get PB3s, they're more like $8 to $10, but then they're 2 years growth already. So yeah, you pay the money, but then you get a bigger plant and there's less maintenance. So depends on your budget and how much area you want to cover.
And the PB is the size of the
root mass. And it's like 600 mil is a PB.
Right.
PB1's 600 mil pint. Yep.